The Dead Sea Scrolls found in Qumran caves have captured the attention of scholars, historians, and religious people for decades. These ancient texts, preserved for centuries in the dry climate of the Judean desert, are among the oldest known Hebrew manuscripts, dating back as far as the 3rd century BCE. But beyond these sacred texts lies a greater mystery: the lives of those who meticulously copied and wrote them. Who were these people? Where did they live? And what customs shaped their secluded community? Join us in Qumran National Park as we uncover the story of a unique sect that lived apart of mainstream Judaism, exploring their rituals, their beliefs, and the remarkable contributions they left behind.
Hello everyone, my name is Krisha Kotev. I'm a tour guide in Israel and I'm going to take you today on a tour of a mysterious settlement of Qumran. We are going to talk about people who lived here. Qumran is very famous for the scrolls which were found here and which were most likely partially written, partially copied by the community, Jewish sect who lived here. But what I want to do with you today is to explain and tell you about the lives of the very sect who wrote them and put an accent on who these people were and what they were doing here in the middle of the desert in the 2nd century. Okay, so please proceed. You can see the walls of the settlement here, okay? They had walls, and this is the main tower. It's not really defense purposes. These walls couldn't defend you from the army coming, but they could defend you from wild animals, and there were plenty of them in Judean desert in ancient times, and they could defend you from robbers. And the tower was basically an observatory. Okay, you could see who was coming. If you needed to run into the mountains and hide in the caves, you would know it beforehand. If the important guests were coming, okay, you would know it beforehand, so you could prepare. So basically, it's not really defense purposes, but it did work to a certain extent for the community purposes. So we are entering the settlement itself right now, and we are going to go up to the tower and try to understand where are we physically. So we are seeing all what is around us. To the west, we have a mountain range. This is also the direction of Jerusalem. On this range were found the caves in which most of the scrolls were found. To the south, we can see, you see the green there, a lot of plants. We have sweet water springs there, okay? So the sect which lived here would have their dates plantations, okay? It's called Ein Fashcha, and it's a natural reserve today, and you can go and base there in cold springs in the middle of the summer. More to the south, we have Ein Gedi, Masada, and even more, we have the Mount of Sodom, the biblical place of Sodom and Gomorrah. Here, east, you can see the Dead Sea. You can see the mountains of Jordan, okay? And if we look north, at the very end of the Dead Sea, this is where the Jordan River flows into the Dead Sea. Okay, so we are very close to another biblical site where Joshua bin Nun crossed Jordan River with all the Israelites when they were coming for the first time into the land of Israel. The closest city to here is Jericho, also located north to us. And it's about 20 minutes drive from here, but it would be at least half a day walk if you were living here in the ancient times. And Jerusalem is 40 minutes, 5 drive, but it's 2 days walking to Jericho from Jerusalem and another half a day here. So you understand that in ancient terms, we are in the middle of nowhere. So who on earth wants to live here and why? So to understand this, we need a bit of background. In general, Judean desert was a place to escape to. Escape from what? From reality. different realities. Okay, you could escape here. This is the desert of the big city, Jerusalem. Each big holy cities in ancient times had their own desert. Okay, and strange things were happening in those deserts. Okay, you could escape here if you broke the law. Okay, you were escaping reality of the law, but you could also escape here if you were escaping reality of regular practical life. If you wanted to be more holy, if you were looking for God, we have to understand that we are talking about the world whose reality is religious. Everyone believes in something. In Judaism, it's one God. Okay, all the other nations have different pantheons. Okay, this is the time when we have only one monotheism and a lot of polytheistic religions. Okay, so but everyone is religious. You do not have atheists in those times, and if you have, they are very, very rare. You probably have cynical people, but but still, this is a religious world. So if you want to become more holy, if you want to talk to God, if you want to talk to yourself, you come to the desert. And this is why in Judean desert, we will always, through the ages, have sects, hermits, prophets, first monasteries, okay, when Christianity comes in here. So this is the reality. So now we are going to focus on this particular set. What you can see around here, okay, is the settlement itself. We will be going into the settlement later on, but just an overview to see how small it is. Okay, it's holding more or less 120 inhabitants, and this is who lives here. Okay, in order to understand who the Essenes, because this is who we think lived here, the Essene sect. They do not call themselves Essenes, the people who lived here. They call themselves Beyachat, community of Beyachat. Beyachat in Hebrew means together, okay? But their mentions, Essenes are mentions by few historians, okay? Basically, we find them in Josephus Flavius, which is a contemporary historian who wrote about his times, and very surprisingly, Josephus Flavius devotes over 40 paragraphs to Essenes. When he's talking about Jewish sects of the Second Temple, we have two big Jewish sects which everybody knows. We have Sadducees and Pharisees, okay? The priests and the elite, this is Sadducees, and Pharisees are the rabbis of the people, okay, which are majority, okay? They get a few paragraphs in Josephus. Essenes get over 40. Again, I'm talking about 120 people. So who are these Essenes, and why would Josephus devote so much and be also sympathetic toward them? Okay, we have Pliny. Pliny is a Roman historian who tells us very specifically that these Essenes live north of En-Gedi. Okay, he names the place. Right? This is the only place we found which somehow could hold a sect. We can see that the community life here was sectarian, okay? So, and it answers the definition of Pliny. Why would Roman historian mentioned such a little sect? Maybe they weren't so little. And also, Philon of Alexandria mentions them and tells us that they live at the Dead Sea, and the only company of theirs is the dates. Okay, so this is what he tells us. So what are they doing here? In order to understand this, we have to go back to more or less minus 150 and understand that Eretz Israel was then under Greek conquest, and there was a kind of ideological war going on here. King Antiochus was very keen on spreading Greek culture. This was the thing, okay? After Alexander Macedon sort of conquered all of his empire, he died, he left all the stuff to his generals. He didn't have children, okay? And they started, each general took a piece and they started arguing who was the real king after Alexander. So this part fell to this Antiochus, and he was very keen on spreading Greek culture. And the Jews in Israel divided into two camps. There were Jews who wanted to embrace the Greek culture, and there were Jews who were very keen on just keeping their identity and didn't want to hear about it. Now, the thing which is happening, which is very critical in Antiochus times, is concerning the office of the high priest. Okay, we have to understand that all the ancient Judaism is about what's going on in the temple. Everything is about sacrifices and temple worship. So the high priest is like the king of all of this. Okay? And the high priest was nominated from the family named Tzadok. He was nominated by whom? In the times of King Solomon, when the first temple was built. This family, Tzadok family, they were the high priests for 800 years. And during Antiochus' time, there's some, we will not go into the details, but there's a political mishmash and political intrigues. And the high priest from the family of Tzadok gets kicked out of his office, and someone else takes it. This is a great thing. I mean, we are talking about a tradition of 800 years. You understand that the priests themselves, some of them, are going to rebel against such a thing. To make things worse, when Israel finally gets its independence and we have a Jewish Hashmonaean king, we would expect that he would bring back Tzadok family to the very office, right? No, he takes the title for himself. He wants to unite secular and religious power, like all the kings through the history, okay? But this causes the schism, and a lot of priests would not follow this new high priest, and they leave Jerusalem, and they start a new sect, which is very Jewish. They keep the same commandments, they observe the same law, but they go a few steps farther. They are very observant for the purity laws, okay? And they basically, this is one of the books of the sect which we found here, they are determinists. Determinism is never a part and never was a part of Judaism. Okay, they claim that all the things are predestined and all the humanity is divided into the sons of light and sons of darkness. If you were born a son of darkness, then you have no chances. You cannot come back to God. There's no repentance. Okay, this is very un-Jewish thought, but this is how they work. So basically, we know that Jews always, since they're monotheistic and all the other nations in ancient time were polytheistic, there was always some kind of division. But here we have division between Jews, okay? And they call themselves sons of light. There are very mysterious processes how to enter this sect, okay? They have some kind of examinations, which we'll talk about later on. And they live kind of a monastic life before Christianity. Only men are permitted. This is a celibate life, which also has nothing to do with Judaism. I mean, in Judaism, what you want to have as a family, God said to Abraham, multiply, and this is what you've got to do, you multiply. Greatest rabbis have to have wives. Prophets had wives. I mean, the family is like the basic institution in Judaism. These guys do not have families. The 120 living here, okay? So we have something very un-Jewish in terms of Jewish thought in Qumran. Okay, so now we are going to see the plan, reconstruction of the settlement, more or less, okay? Just to give you an idea how it could have looked like, because it's hard to look at the ruins and just to imagine. So here we are. Okay, this is the possible reconstruction of the village. We were right here, number 7. This is the tower. Okay, and you can see that the buildings, there are walls. I told you they weren't big walls. Some of the buildings, the walls of the buildings always construct a defense. Okay, this is how usually settlements were built in ancient times. All the open spaces were inside, and you would build, okay, with the walls of the buildings protecting from the outside for defense purposes. What you can see here is plenty of water. Now we are in the middle of the desert, and you are looking, and this is even modest, I would say, according to what you are going to see inside in a second. Okay, and this looks like little Venice in the middle of Judean desert. So we will be talking about where the water was from, but also we need to understand why so much water. Okay, they found here about 10 mikvahs. Mikvah is a ritual Jewish bath where people go to purify themselves from unclean energies. Okay, and we have 10 of them now. I told you 120 people more or less lived here. At the top, 200, okay? If we really want to exaggerate, we don't know because we could only base, we do not have a list, okay? We could base on how many dishes we found, okay? How much room there is in a dining room. So this is our estimation, okay? Again, 10 mikvahs, okay? If we are at 200, the top, it's 1 mikvah per 20 persons. This is luxury. And we are not talking about the Roman fancy spa. We are talking about ascetic community, ascetic sect, which is basically learning, praying, working, and hardly owning anything. So what's going on here with the purity laws? Okay, we'll answer that when we'll go to the mikveh and see the mikveh. Now, just to understand, okay, you can see the mikvahs. Okay, you have also big water cisterns for other purposes. Okay, this is a dining room, okay, kitchen, scribes room. You see that they have 2 floors, okay? They have set of stairs and 2 floors. We'll see some of this, whatever is left, okay? This is the community building and the bakery. And also they had potter workshops. They were making their own dishes, probably also because of the laws of kashrut. Okay, they wanted the dishes to be clean. They wanted them to be self-made, no interference. We understand that so secluded a sect would like to be independent. Okay, so they were trying to be as self-sufficient as possible. Of course, they couldn't grow everything. They couldn't bring everything. They had to buy some stuff, but they did a lot of things by themselves. Okay, so before we enter the settlement, we have the aqueduct here. Okay, when people hear the word aqueduct, they usually imagine these huge Roman bridges with arches. Okay, no, the first aqueducts were just canals, stone canals made in the earth from stones. Okay, they would be usually covered. Here they would cover them with palm leaves, and they were of course plastered so the water wouldn't leak. And they needed a water source. So about the water source for all this place, which is crazy, we will be talking later on. But this is the aqueduct, which you can see from the mountain range, was transporting the water to all the mikvahs and cisterns in the settlement. See, look at the other side, how this is entering, okay, into the canals inside of the settlement. So of course, as I told you, 10 mikvahs. 10 ritual baths. Okay, you can see in the reconstruction, in the picture here, okay, some of it is left, but only little hints of it. We can see that we have a barrier. It was very important for an unclean person to come on one side and the clean person would go on the other side. They couldn't touch. Okay, so this is why we have a barrier here. Okay, let's look at the real mikveh. So you can see the water canal, which is transferring water, okay, to the mikveh itself, okay, coming from the aqueduct, which we just saw. And this is the mikveh itself, one of the ritual baths, okay. It's relatively small one comparing to all the other ones, which we are going to see. You can see the stairs, and you can see that there is like a hole in the ground where you can see that they put this barrier we saw on the picture before, okay. Basically, it's important to understand that in the Second Temple times, especially last Second Temple is like 500 years, okay? So we do have subdivisions of the period. So the last Second Temple period, like minus first and the first century, people were more or less crazy about the purity laws, including mikveh and the dishes, okay? Everyone. Here, we have even this taken to the extreme. In ancient times, we can say that there was not really a division. We kind of divided in modern times into a spiritual realm and physical realm. In ancient time, everything went together. Today, when a Jew goes to the mikveh, he goes to clean his soul. This sect, Essenes, had hierarchy. Okay, I already told you that they were consisted of priests, which left the temple, okay, for the political reasons and ideological reasons, okay, and they were like the high council, and it was a hierarchy, and the lowest part of the hierarchy were novices, okay. Even novices would be consisted of second-year novices, and the first year were called volunteers. And before this, you had like a 0 grade of people who were here and were being considered to become those volunteers on the way to become real initiates, okay? And this is all different levels of purity. So if such a novice, and this is a little settlement, is passing by, and here we have a priest walking, okay? The level of cleanliness from the beginning is very different. They cannot touch. And the street is narrow. And if the garment touches the garment, the uncleanliness of the novice is going to pass on the priest, and then the priest has to immediately go to the mikveh. This is why we have so many mikvahot here. The uncleanness can also pass on you from the subject, from the object, not only from the person, okay? They were very particular about making juices, for example. They believed the water, we all know that water transfers holiness, but they also knew that water transfers unholiness, okay? Maybe we can say energetical dirt, okay? So they were very much into it, and this is why we will find 10 mikvahs in here, because these guys accept the ritual 2 days going to the mikveh, and we'll talk about it later why, okay, would have to go to the mikveh very often whenever they touched something which was unclean or someone who was unclean. Okay, so as we go together with the aqueduct, we find another mikveh, okay? And we find a huge water cistern over here and another mikveh over there. So you can start grabbing what I am talking about. I mean, this is the settlement. Water and water and water in the middle of the desert. Now the white stuff which you see inside, okay, is the plaster. They were very good at plastering. And it is amazing because we do not find here plastered rooms. Plaster is for rich, okay, or for storing stuff, like water, or storage room for food, okay? And here we don't find any plaster except in the water system, okay? And one room, the dining room, was also plastered, which this is why we know it was like a fancy room. But they are very good at it, but they do not do it in any other rooms. They don't use it, even though they can, okay? So we have the aesthetic side here of their community shown, okay? No luxury. On the other side, we have administration room, okay? But really it should be called a treasure room, because what they found here was a real treasure. They found 3 jars full of ancient coins in here. So this is how we understand that the sect was not that poor. They lived poor and ascetic life, but they had their treasure. Everyone, upon entering the sect, would have to give away their possessions. So this is how we understand that they were trading, there was economy here, and they were also headquarters of the whole Essene sects, other people living in the cities, having families, okay? We have this hierarchy is going, okay? The novices here are higher level than a married man in the city, because he cannot be as clean as someone living in the celibate here, okay? People in the cities also would have loss. Let's say they would have to give away to the sect the amount of money for 2 days' work during the week, okay? They were distributing to the poor of their sect. They were very caring for their own, okay? So still, they lived ascetic life. They had very little rations of food, even to such an extent. We'll talk about it in the dining room. They were very self-sufficient, but they did have their treasury room. And they needed to buy things. They needed to buy grains. Sometimes they needed to buy, other articles, holiness articles. Okay, and it also looks like they were the head of the whole Essene sects. I told you there that only men were admitted here. But really, we know of the Essenes that they were married Essenes. Not all the Essenes were living here. Okay, we had Essenes in the cities, and they would have families, and they would be under kind of a different law. A bit like in Orthodox Christianity, whoever knows it, that priests in Christianity in Orthodox Christianity, can have families unless they are holding very high statuses, okay? Then they already have to go to the celibate. So this is kind of hierarchy, meaning we do not have hierarchy only here. This hierarchy extends out of this place. This is like headquarters, okay? And we have Essenes all over, okay? So it's starting to explain to us why would prominent historians of the era write about them, okay? It would be only 120 people in the middle of the desert. We wouldn't hear that much. It wouldn't be a big influence, okay? Okay, pay attention please to the stairs. I told you that there were 2 floors here. Of course, we cannot really see it now, but we see the stairs. So whatever was up there didn't survive. Now we are walking into the part when we had workshops, okay? Some of them were not identified, some yes. This we know was a bakery. We can see the oven here, okay? There was also found here some cylinder which looked like a weighting object for weighting flour, okay? So this is where they would make their bread. And here we have a grinding wheel, okay? It's made for 2 donkeys, but also 2 people could operate it. You would put like a big stick of wood inside. You would put grain here, and you would put grain inside, and you would turn it. This is how they got the flour, okay? And this is one of the things, for example, which they couldn't grow here. They did have vegetable garden, by the way, with the amounts of water they managed to gather here. They, as I said, had the dates plantations farther down, but they couldn't grow wheat, okay? So they had to buy grains, and they would grain them here because there is no refrigerator, and grains can preserve much more time than flour itself. So this probably would be used very often, okay? And also the bakery, this is why they have it here. And in front of you, another mikveh, okay? Here you can absolutely see the partitions, okay, made in the stairs themselves. They are well visible, okay? And as we move with the aqueduct, okay, we will be getting, under this little bridge, to another huge water cistern, okay, of the Qumran. And look at the amount of plaster here. I told you these people were great at plastering, okay? It is really well preserved here.
That's huge.
That's huge. So I've been talking to you about food, about money. Yeah, we did talk about purification, but let's focus now on spiritual life of this sect. And for this, we need to move into a different room. Okay, here we are in the rooms which were study halls. We think they were study halls because we found a lot of little oil lamps here, okay? And you have places to put light, okay, at night. Yeah, put the oil lamps, okay? And you can see the nice finishings okay, of the room. It reminds us more of living quarters than anything else which we saw till now. So this is where these guys were studying, okay? And the other room, which I want to show you, and then we'll put it all together. Okay, and this is the Scribes room. Okay, we have a nice reconstruction of both of those rooms. You see that they are one near the other. Okay, so this is how it looked like, the construction. Okay, we found this kind of tables I will show you later in the museum. Okay, so they think they use them for scribing, for copying the books or writing the books. Okay, and here, okay, we have the study room. Okay, so in this room, why do we call it a scribe's room? They found inkwells, they found lamps, and they found the table, furniture like this. It fell from the second floor. Okay, so the scribe's room was really above us, not here. Okay, now it's important to understand, because we are saying this was here, this was here, this was here. Okay, how did they live? Okay, let's try to go in and give a possible day in the life of an Essene person belonging to the sect. Okay, so they would wake up at sunrise, and they would say their prayers in the direction of the sun. And these guys, they are Jewish. They worship only one God, but they pray to the sun. Where do all the Jews pray? What is the direction? Jerusalem. They should be praying west. No, they get up, they pray east. Okay? So they say their prayers. The caves you saw, this is the mountain range. So they live in the caves. There's no living quarters in this settlement. They go to sleep in the caves. We'll talk about it later. Okay? The person gets up, says their prayers in the direction of the sun. Okay? And what does he do? He goes to mikveh. First thing he does is cleaning himself, purifying himself. And then he goes to work, okay, wherever he's assigned to. Okay, he can go down to work at the plantations. He can go to work at one of the workshops. Whatever he has to do, everyone is assigned job. This is what he does until the 5th hour of the day. At the 5th hour of the day, everyone gathers back, and everyone goes to the mikveh. Again, okay? No nudity is permitted, despite the fact that this is only men, no women. Okay, so they would go with loin clothes, covering themselves minimally, but they would. Okay, and they go to the mikveh, and then they put a clean white garment on. Each day, this is not a holiday. And then they go to the dining room and eat their first meal. About the meals and how they ate meals and what meals really signified, we will be talking at the dining room. So after that, they go back to work and gather again for the evening meal. And the same process, going to the mikveh, changing to the nice garment, okay, and eating the meal, okay? About the garments, you have to understand that this is crazy that these people change twice per day into a nice garment, because their regular working garments, they would wear them until they basically fell off them. Nobody would ask for a new, this is a community, you don't go and buy, yeah? Ask for a new clothes until it's shrewd, you know, it's already, okay? And still twice a day, they put a nice white garment for eating. So this eating, okay, must have been something about it. Okay, and we'll talk about it later. Now, what is happening here at night? They don't sleep at night. Okay, you would expect people working in such conditions, okay, heat, everything by foot. No, night is divided in 3 parts, okay? 1/3 of the night, they study, the study room which we saw. 1/3 of the night, they copy. They copied the books, all the scrolls, which were found, 900 scrolls, okay? Here in the cave, people are sitting here and in the room above, which is non-existent anymore, and copy. We don't know how they copied, okay? We don't know if they actually had scrolls in front of them and copied, or if it was from the dictation, okay? We do recognize that there is some kind of different orthography here. Okay, things are written a bit, it's still Hebrew, we understand it, we can read it, okay, but they have different kind of orthography than found in different places, but still we have no idea it was, if this was a particular mistakes of people who were copying from the scrolls, or the dictation and whoever was dictating was pronouncing maybe words a bit differently. We don't know. It's impossible to know. But this is the nightlife of the community. Okay? Now we are going to see the main activity, okay? The dining room. We all love eating, people love eating, okay? And let's find out if love of food was what made it the main activity, or maybe something else, something more mysterious. Okay, when we go into the dining room, of course, how come not, we will be passing by another mikveh, and this one is a huge one.
Wow.
Okay, so what I want to show you here, there's a picture, it gives us some kind of an idea how the room looked like, because there's really no room left, just a little bit of walls. But this is the biggest room in the Qumran, and you can see how they were sitting. They were sitting on the floor. This is the pottery bowls I told you about. We'll see some of them in the museum. Okay, they were sitting in 2 rows. This is the place of the high priests, okay? And this was the plastered room, okay? Meaning the fancy room. Okay, now we will go into the shade and try to explain about what's really going on here. Okay, so we do have benches here today to sit, but as I told you, they were sitting on the floor. Now, what really is the meaning of the meal? I told you in the introduction that these guys broke up out from the temple. We know that after the temple was destroyed, okay, Judaism kind of made a shift and exchanged the offerings, which were the main things which was going on in the temple, exchanged them with prayers. Okay, instead of a morning and afternoon sacrifice, we would have a morning and afternoon prayer, shacharit and mincha. Okay, later on, the evening prayer was added as obligatory prayer. It was not from the beginning. Okay, here we have a different story. It's a hypothesis, but it's a very probable one. Okay, I already told you these guys eat twice per day, not 3 times per day. Okay, 5th hour would be like the morning sacrifice, and then later in the day, in the afternoon, the second meal, the afternoon sacrifice. We know from their books that who cooked the food, and this is really amazing, because when we think in terms of sects and hierarchies, we always think that elite is those guys who are making decisions and kind of sitting leg on leg and, you know, doing nothing and just giving orders. Who cooked? Priests. Cook of this place who were preparing the food were priests themselves. Because food is what you enter into your body. And these people, considering themselves sons of light, what did they really wanted? What was their aspiration? They tell us about it in their books. They wanted to become like angels. Purity of an angel. So the most eligible person will be cooking for them, the priest. Okay? So priests prepare the meal for all the people who are lower in hierarchy than them. Okay? And they come here and eat this meal after going into the mikveh and putting on white garments. What does it remind us? This is how people sacrificed in the temple in Jerusalem. Okay, so the hypothesis is that two meals in the Qumran actually were in exchange of sacrifices in the temple, because they wouldn't go and sacrifice in the temple when there was a false high priest there. Okay, this is what they rebelled against. So basically, this is the temple, a form of the temple, this room. Now, they had crazy rules about drinking and eating. Basically, if you wanted to enter a sect, you could join them for food only in your second year when you were a novice. When you were a first year volunteer, you wouldn't enter here. Too holy for you. In the second year, you could join, okay, and sit in these neat rows which you saw, okay, but you couldn't drink. You could only participate in food, because of the danger that if you coughed and you had a liquid in your mouth, you could spill it on somebody and then make him impure. This is what they write. This is like not exact quotation, but this is how they explain the law. Also, Josephus Flavius writes about it in his books. Okay, so again, water, cleanliness, purification, or tuma, okay, impure things, enter even here to the Holy of Holies of the Qumran sect. Okay, so basically you could participate in a whole meal and drink with everyone only after you were a full initiate. Now they would sit here in two rows. The priest would sit here and they would say the blessing before food, and then the meals would be eaten in total silence. No conversation. In general, this was not a very conversational sect. You couldn't just speak. People didn't speak. No small talk here. Okay. If you wanted to speak, you needed to request a permission, and of course not during the meal. Okay. They would have a council room and meetings for the whole community, and there you could ask permission for speaking. And if there was no sense in what you were talking, you could be also punished. How did they punish? They would lower your food rations. Okay, there in the codex of their laws, we see for what crimes, what the penalties, and we see how they would totally shorten the food rations, which were not big to begin with. And these are really amazing laws, because they forbid you to gossip. They forbid you to accuse without a proof. If you have a grudge against your friend, whomever you are working with, you have to say it on the same day and not to carry it in your heart, because then it becomes hatred. Okay, and if you say it after a few days, it's already much bigger. You are blowing it up. They understand it. They are kind of psychologists too. So if you wanna say bad stuff about him, you have to do it at the very spot it's happening. Later on, you will be punished, not him. Okay? And it's again always food rations. These guys do not get much to eat. Okay, I'm going to read you now a fragment of the Manual of Discipline of the Sect. Okay, which introduces us to totally new idea in any religion of the world. Okay, of the commitment. Everyone who wishes to join the community must pledge himself to respect God and men, to live according to the communal rule, to seek God, to do what is good and upright in his sight, in accordance with what he has commanded through Moses and through his servants the prophets, to love all that he has chosen and hate all that he has rejected, to keep far from all evil and to cling to all good works, to act truthfully and righteously and justly on earth, and to walk no more in the stubbornness of a guilty heart and of lustful eyes, doing all manner of evil, to bring into a bond of mutual love all who have declared their willingness to carry out the statutes of God, to join the formal community of God, to walk blamelessly before him in conformity with his various laws and dispositions, to love all the children of light, each according to his stake in the formal community of God, and to hate all the children of darkness, each according to the measure of his guilt, which God will ultimately requite. This is basically, I think we can safely say, for the first time when we found in the religious text commandment to hate. Okay, we do find certain nations which Israelis were supposed to hate and kill, but this is like a long time story. This is not continuous. This is the point in the time. This is permanent. Okay, if you want to enter the sect, you have to hate the sons of darkness. Nowhere in Judaism there is a commandment to hate. Nowhere in polytheistic, pagan religions. They don't hate on religious basis. We need to understand that paganism basically is one of the most tolerant times in terms of religions. Okay, they were cruel, they had plenty of wars, they would kill, but not on religious basis. There was no argument whose God is better, whose God is real, whose God is false. This was not an issue. Okay, so this is for the first time we see that people are required to hate. Now, they were smart, okay? They would hate the sons of darkness, but they wouldn't show it. They had another rule which said you will not show your hatred, okay? Only in the judgment day, when the Messiah comes, and God will tell you to act on this hatred, you will act. Now, it's not the time. Okay, so it's still, it's kind of filtered hatred, but nowhere before we find a commandment to hate somebody for religious purposes put in such a straightforward way. Okay, now I would like maybe to add a few words about Essenes in general, not only in this place. I mean, how this place fits in Essene reality of the Second Temple, because we know that Essenes were living near Jerusalem as well. Okay, so Essenes, when they would be going out from here, in Eretz Israel or in different places, Jews were by then in Babylon, Jews were by then in Egypt, okay, communities, they would know where to go. The Essenes homes were open to Essenes. It was like kind of the level of kashrut today. Okay, whoever knows the laws of kashrut knows that there are people who eat the regular kashrut, and then there is mehadrin, which is like a higher level and more orthodox. And there are people who eat some kind of kashruyot, touch anything which is not approved of this rabbi. Okay, so Essenes would stay only in the house of Essenes, because there only the cleanliness would be guaranteed. They treated Jerusalem as kind of sanctuary, not very used, but kind of sanctuary, okay? All of Jerusalem, in their eyes, was like a temple. You couldn't slaughter regular meat in Jerusalem and eat it. They wouldn't even go with the leather bags for carrying stuff from animals which were not sacrificed in the temple. All Jerusalem, for them, had the meaning of the temple, okay? So it is very questionable if they really lived there. We think we found some kind of Essene settlement near Zion Gate, but it was probably outside of the walls. Another very particular issue here and in Jerusalem would be going to the bathroom. We are talking about total purity. Okay, these guys want to be pure. Now, when they want to go to the bathroom, they kind of dig a hole and they cover, okay? And the problem is that you cannot be unclean on Shabbat. I told you about each day they eat 2 meals which are like super holy. On Shabbat you cannot be unclean. So on Shabbat you do not go to the bathroom. Okay, basically this is the law. You do not go to the bathroom. You need to wait after Shabbat goes out. This is how extreme it is in terms of keeping the bodily purity. Another law which we know is a law of pikuach nefesh. During Shabbat you are allowed to break Shabbat in order to save someone's life. It's called pikuach nefesh, saving the soul, okay? And the Essenes wouldn't observe this law. I mean, if let's say you saw this big water reservoirs which we have here, okay, someone falls into it and he doesn't know how to swim. You can save him. There's no law you cannot save a life on Shabbat, but you cannot use a tool which is unclean on Shabbat. Meaning, if near such a reservoir we have a big pole, okay, with some kind of net which was used to, during the weekdays, would be used for cleaning this reservoir, okay, to keeping water clean, you cannot use it on Shabbat. Okay, so either you jump and save him, okay, but you cannot use this pole, you cannot use any rope, you cannot use anything which is, as we say, muktzeh, unclean for Shabbos, okay? So they would watch a person, a friend, die and not break a Shabbos. Okay, this is another aspect of this community. On one hand, very caring, very sharing, okay? On the other hand, extremely strict. Another very interesting thing about them later on with Christianity, since they are so strict, for the married members, not the ones living here, the married members living in the cities, they did not recognize divorce. Okay, in Judaism, one of the first monotheism, and we have divorce per granted. I mean, because it is family-based, it's very clear that sometimes it doesn't work, and divorce is implanted in Jewish law. In Christianity, on the other hand, you cannot get a divorce. And we know that Paulus, the apostle, which is basically responsible for spreading Christianity, took this law from Essenes. Essenes claimed that Adam and Eve were created for each other, okay? And this is why they decided the law of divorce in Judaism was wrong, didn't apply to them. The couple could separate, they didn't have to live together if they didn't want to, but they couldn't remarry until one of them was still alive. Okay? So the custom of not divorcing in Christianity basically comes from these guys. So basically, as we see, in order to kind of summarize the sect, if we can do such a thing at all, we need to understand how far they went away from what we call regular Judaism in the Second Temple times. Okay, one of the artifacts which we found here was a sun calendar. Sun calendar, Jewish regular calendar is kind of a mix between moon and sun calendar. Okay, we once for years we add additional months in order to make up for the days which were kind of lost. Okay, this is how this works. Sun calendar is something kind of predestined, meaning if you have a holiday falling on Sunday, each year it will fall on Sunday. Okay, it's a different calendar. So basically, Essenes, by adopting the sun calendar, cut themselves off from the dates of the Jewish holiday. When the Day of Atonement was here in Qumran, in Jerusalem, it was a regular day, and the opposite. When the whole country was fasting and praying and begging God on the Day of Atonement for forgiving their sins and writing them in the book of life, here in Qumran, everyone would go to work. So you understand what I said at the beginning, it is a religious schism. Now, an interesting thing, additional thing, which we find, is their terminology. We very often find the description of the righteous one, the teacher of righteousness, okay, as opposed to the evil one, the false one, the lying one, okay, very extreme terminology. We also know from their books that there was an attempt on the life of the righteous teacher, okay, when on the Day of Atonement. Why? Because when here everyone celebrated the Day of Atonement, in Jerusalem it was regular day and they knew it, so they could come and try, okay, to assassinate him. So there is, they talk in terms of war, okay, even though they do business and they go out and they travel and they preach, okay, in the world, and some of them, the married ones, live in the world, in the communities outside of here, okay, their language is the language of war. They even have a book of war, okay. We talked before about hatred, so it is very dual, okay. And it's amazing because when you read this stuff, what comes to my mind is like the modern fantasy books, when we have the good and the bad and the righteous one and the evil one, and it's all the fantasy stuff. I mean, these guys lived like this. These were their criteria for for functioning in the world. So it is amazing. Now we'll go and see one of the caves.
This cave, cave number 4, was discovered in 1952 and is the most famous among the Qumran caves. It yielded a true treasure, thousands of scroll fragments from hundreds of manuscripts, comprising 75% of all the scrolls found in the Qumran caves. These manuscripts include biblical texts, apocalyptic writings, commentaries on the Bible, Jewish legal literature, prayers, sectarian writings, and Jewish ritual objects such as tefillin, mezuzahs, and more.
So now in this very cave you can meet the present inhabitants of the cave, the little family of ibex, mother and the child. This is whatever is left of wild animals in Judean deserts. Okay, so if you are so different in your lifetime, it is obvious that you also will be different in your death. In front of us, we have Essene cemetery. You can see there are graves, okay, marked by stones, pile of stones, okay, and they are always in Essene tradition, they will be from north to south direction, okay. Now, how is it different, okay? What were burial customs in a second temple period? So rich people, elite, would be buried in caves, very often man-made caves, very beautifully finished, okay? We have many other examples of this in the Holy Land, okay? Here we have something very much like today and very unheard of then, because only commoners would be buried in the fields and a few stones put over them, okay? And this is exactly the community rule. They are not equals, there is a hierarchy, but in death they are equal, okay? And they will be buried in the same way. It doesn't matter if you were high priest or priest in a high position on a community council, doesn't matter what level of holiness you approach, you will be buried in the same way as a novice who died, okay? So we have here about 1,000 graves, okay? You can see them, they extend over there, okay? On the lower plane of the hill, you can see that the cemetery continues. Only 35 of them were excavated, so we cannot really say much about this cemetery. We know that most of men buried here were, of course, men. Now, all these historians which I mentioned before, Josephus, Pliny, they say that Essenes had this reputation of living to the very old age. Again, excavating 35 graves doesn't prove anything. But guys whom we found here were aged 30, 40. Okay, so we don't know. We also found a grave of a woman with plenty of necklaces and earrings and all what you want. Okay, but the grave wasn't in a north-south position. And the jewelry was Bedouin-like. So archaeologists suppose that this was just an added grave. This burial place was probably used by Bedouin tribes afterwards, a couple of hundred years after. So we can find here graves which were much later, but molded in the same fashion, because this is what you do in the desert. So wild animals wouldn't come and dig you out, which would be a sacrilege to the body, okay? So this is the Essene cemetery with the beautiful view of the Dead Sea behind it. What you see in front of you is a potter shop, okay, pottery workshop. This is where they made their dishes. We have some in the museum here, okay? And what is important to say, I already told you they try to be self-sufficient. So we saw bakery, we saw grinding workshop, we have a pottery workshop, okay? We also know that they grew dates on the date plantations. They made honey from these dates. They also grew bees. They would make bees honey. It could be only there, because only there we had fauna which could sustain bees, okay? they made wine from the dates. They probably would need to buy wine because in Judaism it's very important that the wine is made from grapes. Okay, so they would need to buy additional grape wine, but they made their wine from dates. Okay, and many other things. So they were really, really as self-sufficient as it is possible to be in the middle of the desert. Okay, so as I promised you, I will explain to you how did Essenes acquired all the water which they needed to sustain their little Venice in the middle of the Judean desert. So this is Qumran River or Qumran Canyon. Okay, I know that usually in the countries you come from, when people say a word river, they mean a body of water, which water is constantly in it. In Israel, especially in a Judean desert, the story is a bit different. Okay, we have what's called, especially in the deserts, dry rivers, which fill up with water during winter. Okay, now you have to understand that we are in the biggest depression in the world. Okay, we are 400 meters below the sea level, and Jerusalem, which is, as I said, 40 minutes away drive from here, is 800 meters above the sea level. So coming from Jerusalem, from the mountain range of Mount of Olives, Mount Moriah, okay, all this mountain range, when we go down, we go 1,200 meters, okay, into the desert to the Dead Sea. So what is happening in winter in terms of the rain? When it's raining in Jerusalem, the clouds kind of stop over the mountain range of Jerusalem, okay? And hardly any rain comes here to the Judean desert. But what is happening, the rain which is falling is cascading down in winter, okay, in the rainy seasons, is cascading down through all the canyons which are cutting through Judean desert into the Dead Sea. And this is one of those canyons. This is why it's called Qumran Canyon, Qumran River. So in the rainy season, which starts in the autumn, okay, it's a sunny day, no clouds. But all of a sudden, all of this canyon can fill up with huge amounts of cascading water. Okay, it will fill all this canyon. You saw the depth of it, okay, and it will go into the Dead Sea. Till this day, you see that they made like canals under the main road there, okay, so it wouldn't overflood the road. It still overfloods the road, okay. Till this day, the traffic is not functioning when we have floods here. The main road, the 90 road, is cut when there's raining in Jerusalem by different floods from different canyons, okay? So what did Essenes do? Essenes were smart guys, okay? You see the aqueduct is right on this side of you, okay? And it's going up this mountain range, okay? If we would go on the track a little bit on the mountain, okay, you would see that they kind of build like a canal inside of the rock, okay, like a little cave, a canal, and they needed to be really smart. I mean, it's not just making a hole, okay, because you have to know exactly what angle to do it, so the water, okay, would go down, but at not too fast, because then it would overflow all of their canals. So all these angles, also of the aqueduct and also of the canal which they made inside the rock, okay, are very particularly calculated. So basically this is all they did. This is all you needed to do here to have these amounts of water, because the amounts of water when there is flood are so huge that it was enough, okay, to fill out all of the reservoirs for the whole, till the next flood. And we have floods in autumn and in spring, okay? So this is basically the story of the water. So one last important thing to say. we said some very definite thing about Essenes. We were talking about how secluded they became from Judaism, and they had reasons for it. Okay, we talked about hatred as one of the beliefs, cardinal beliefs of the sect. We talked about very harsh laws. We talked about sons of light and sons of darkness, and them treating themselves as and believing that they are sons of light, meaning bringing themselves kind of above the rest of the Jewish society. Okay, these are very difficult things. So it's interesting to see how they behave in the end. When the great rebellion against Roman broke up, Josephus tells us that Essenes fought like lions. They fought with all the other Jews to defend Israel against Romans. They didn't seclude themselves. They didn't preach their ideology. It was all put aside in the moment of darkness when everyone was in danger. And this is why nobody came back to Qumran to retrieve all the scrolls and to retrieve the money which was left here. Okay, because they had also a treasury, remember. So this is why these scrolls and all these treasures were basically waiting until only in 20th century people took interest when the scrolls were found. So we cannot be judges. We can only tell the story and invite you to come here and see for yourself.